Welcome to The Best of Our Knowledge, a program focused on education, learning, and research. On this episode, we'll learn how a hospital is partnering with a public library to give babies their first books. Although the name is often used, only 3 states in the country have true universal pre-kindergarten. And we'll speak with the next president of Albany Law School, the country's oldest independent school of law. I'm Lucas Willard. It's all next on The Best of Our Knowledge. This is The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm your host, Lucas Willard. A new program at a hospital in Schenectady, New York, is providing books to new families as part of an initiative to combat childhood illiteracy. The Best of Our Knowledge's Jody Cowan reports.
Launched on January 1st, Books for Babies at Bellevue gives every newborn what could be their first book. Books for Babies is a partnership between Bellevue Women's Center and the local Schenectady County Public Library. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, the first 3 years of life are the most critical period for speech and language development, and reading aloud is one of the best ways for parents to expose young children to language, build vocabulary, and foster imagination. Kayla Wallman, coordinator of youth services at the library, says another goal of the program is to get kids ready for school as early as possible.
So we start as young as we possibly can. We start by getting more books into the homes. Research shows that only 1 in 5 children have a book of their own in the home, and that access to literacy makes such a difference down the line. So we encourage parents from a very young age to read aloud with their children, to spend time talking with their children, singing, interacting while playing, since it's all about learning through play when they're little, and books can be a great way to do that.
In addition to the new books, parents are also given tips for a successful reading experience, such as letting children turn book pages, talking about the pictures, and using one's voice to convey fun and excitement. Ann Screbutenis, a youth services assistant at the library, helped spearhead the initiative. She said the idea for the program came from memories of receiving a book from the hospital when her daughter was born 19 years ago.
Talking to my neighbor who's a doctor here at Bellevue Ellis, delivering babies, and I just said, "Oh, you give a book when, the babies are born to the mom, right?" And she said, "No, what's that?" And so one thing led to another. I just said, "Oh, you need this program."
Screbutenis said sometimes new parents come to the library unsure of how or when to introduce books to their children.
Moms come in with baby carriages and saying, "Oh, the board books are over there." And I would get responses like, "Oh, they're too little," or maybe when they get older, or "No, not yet," or "They're going to put it in their mouth," or, "They're going to rip it." And I was just like, "Oh, you could be doing this now." And I think, the pandemic and everything happening and hearing how kids are falling behind, it just felt like, okay, we gotta do something now. And it's got to start much earlier than before they get to school.
Dr. Carolyn Robbins-Levine, a neonatologist at Bellevue's Women's Center and neighbor to Screbutenis, says the friends spent countless hours discussing how a literacy program could have the greatest impact.
There's so many of our families who don't have the means for books and may not even have the understanding of how important it is to read to these kids. Everything is happening in this first year of life. Through the first 3 years, the brain is just a sponge. And the sooner we can get to these kids and read to them and talk to them, the more successful they're going to be in life. And that's our message.
The Books for Babies at Bellevue initiative is complemented by another program through Reach Out and Read, a national nonprofit. Reach Out and Read follows up on literacy progress as each child ages and aims to strengthen the relationship between parents and caregivers to reinforce early reading goals. Jacqueline Montgomery, director of nursing at Bellevue Women's Center, says children will receive a book at each of their checkups from 6 months to 6 years and beyond.
And the provider actually demonstrates that reading to the patient and the child in order to show them really the importance of that early literacy and help them to build that skill set. So far, we've given out about 200. We do about 2,000 deliveries a year, so we're really excited to continue this with every family. There's actually a range of books that stars themselves have selected, and these really offer a range of early literacy skills. We would love to grow it throughout this region and grow it outside of just the baby that's delivering. I know some hospitals actually also offer a book to the siblings, so we are looking at expanding there, but really excited to be taking this first step right now.
From Schenectady, this is Jody Cowan for The Best of Our Knowledge.
A new report published by the Rockefeller Institute of Government in Albany, New York, examines universal pre-kindergarten programs in Florida, Oklahoma, and Vermont. A growing body of evidence has shown pre-K programs have a positive effect on academic, behavioral, career, and life outcomes, but the report also finds New York's enrollment is far from universal, despite the often use of the term. Research completed by interns with the Institute's Center for Law and Policy Solutions assessed the accessibility, quality, funding, and impacts of state-level programs. To learn more about the report's findings, I spoke with Dr. Laura Rabineau, the Rockefeller Institute's Deputy Director of Research.
What the report looks at are, what these programs look like. What are their kind of rules, shall we say? What is the student-to-teacher ratio? What are the qualifications for instructors? Those types of things. Also, how it's administered, sometimes through a voucher program. For example, Vermont does this two ways, right? Districts provide 10 hours a week, 35 weeks a year minimum of programming for preschool students. But families can also choose to take a voucher that equals 10 hours a week, 35 weeks a year to a private program. Each state administers this a little differently. Each has some different bounds around who can or can't be a provider or requirements for districts to take these things up. And they play out with different impacts. But I will say that we have this large body of research that pre-exists these programs and has happened alongside these programs that already demonstrates a broadly positive, if uneven, impact. And the ways in which the individual state universal pre-K programs have been measured varies. And so comparing them isn't always like comparing apples to apples, right? We have to take each one a bit individually. They've all also started at different points in time. We have Oklahoma being the first in 1998, I believe, and then we have Florida in 2005, and then Vermont in 2014. And so the depth of the literature on each of those is different as well.
And Vermont has had that universal pre-K program for the shortest amount of time, and although there may not be a ton of data going back compared to especially something that happened in the 90s, are there signs or any preliminary evidence that shows the impacts of Vermont's program at this time, almost 10 years out?
Yeah, so the state had commissioned a report on Vermont's program that has occurred, and you can look at some, I would say, nascent test scores for younger students because they have to work their way not just through the program, but then up to third grade at least to really see those impacts. And then again, when we look at that longer history of research, right, we noted sometimes we see a fade out and then we see a persistence over time. So there's enough to say that there seems to be a positive, if still modest, impact, but it's not yet definitive because we don't really have that much time to look at it across. It does seem to be that, at least when parents were surveyed, they found the program to be very accessible. That seems to play out in terms of the numbers of students or percent of students that are enrolled. Vermont serves the highest percent of students in their state universal program. It's 76% of 4-year-olds, 59% of 3-year-olds, which is huge because most programs don't provide for 3-year-olds, or if they do, it's a fairly small percent. We're talking like maybe 5%.
I'm sure a lot of this comes down to money, too, especially when comparing the different states that have different models. Does the study look at how money is used in these states? And has that been a hindering factor in establishing pre-K programs across the country?
I couldn't say if it's hindering or not based on this research. What I can say is that there are very different levels of state funding in particular for these programs. So Vermont is, I believe, the highest at $7,900 a student. So you can see that's a really big range. Now, that doesn't take into account local funding or federal funding, which are a really important part of our preschool funding package. Florida, unfortunately, doesn't report that total funding, and so you can't compare them equivalently.
So how about states like New York, which call it universal pre-K, but it's really not? So how is that different than, say, what Vermont is doing across the border?
Right. So we provide funding to any district that wants to implement a pre-K program, but we don't require that all districts implement a program. So we serve a rather large number of students already. In fact, New York serves more than most other states, even without having a quote-unquote universal pre-K program by our definition, right? So it serves about 120,000 students. There are only, I believe, California, Florida, and maybe Texas that have more than that. Florida's at about 166,000, I believe, for comparison. And Florida serves far larger than the other two programs that we're talking about. Vermont is not even 10,000 students, I believe. So really orders of magnitude difference here. I think an important point as New York looks towards expanding its universal program to be a, by this definition, universal program, is to think about the workforce needs for teachers that would be required to go across all districts, the maintenance of the kind of quality indicators that lead to better outcomes like low student-to-teacher ratio, higher certifications for teachers, those kinds of things, right? So there's a challenge in how to maintain that as you grow a program. There's also a challenge in a larger scale in a different state. And then there are challenges, I think, with whether or not a district chooses to implement a program and whether or not they have the right incentive structure, support, etc.
Dr. Laura Rabineau is Deputy Director of Research at the Rockefeller Institute of Government in Albany. You're listening to The Best of Our Knowledge. State budget season is underway in New York. As state lawmakers begin to deliberate on state spending, advocates are packing the hallways of the state capitol to be heard. Kelly McMahon, CEO of the New York State Network for Youth Success, is one of those advocating for an enhanced after-school learning and enrichment program. We recently spoke.
In New York State, we have two dedicated funding streams for after school. The first is the Advantage After School program, and the second is the Empire State After School program. We're looking to invest an additional $219 million to merge these two programs and align them to better strengthen supports for the field. So this investment will really help not only create new access opportunities, but also expand quality.
And this funding not only goes to just school districts, correct?
Correct. So it also goes to community-based organizations, which we believe are critical to having a high-quality program to really have that partnership between the school district and the community-based organization.
How does New York State rank in terms of funding for after-school programs?
Over the recent years, we've actually been doing a lot better. I believe we're number 2 in the country. But saying that, we are still far below what California invests in their after-school programs.
With the different funding streams that are available now, is that confusing for
Yes.
school districts, nonprofits? How do you navigate where you apply for funding? What is that like?
It's very confusing. There are so many different funding streams. We have one federal funding stream, which is 21st Century, and that's funneled through the state education department. And then we have these two state-funded after-school programs, Empire and Advantage. One is funded through education, and so it goes through the state education department and then to the Office of Children and Family Services, whereas the other program, Advantage, is through Human Services and is directly through Office of Children and Family Services. So it's quite complicated.
Is this funding open to organizations large and small? Say it's just a small community school after school program versus a larger organization like the Boys and Girls Club, where you might have one regional organization with several clubhouses that serves thousands of students.
Yes, absolutely. And we always encourage our smaller programs to apply as well. We know the demand is great. Right now in New York, for every one child in an after-school program, 4 are waiting to get in. So we know the demand is there. Community-based organizations are allowed to apply. And again, we really encourage those school community partnerships.
Yeah, I'm wondering about how many people just don't know about this kind of state funding. Too many.
Too many. Or there's too many hoops to go through in order to complete the contracting process, to get reimbursed. We've seen some of those issues in previous years where our contractors are waiting for too long to get payment, and so they have to withdraw from the contract, which is certainly something we don't want to see. So we've been working really closely with the state to try and correct some of those issues.
Does your group do any advising for small nonprofits or organizations about filling out paperwork or making sure that the money is spent on time, that kind of thing?
We can, absolutely. So our entire role at the network is to be a support to the people who are doing the hard work. And so we want to make sure that we have all of the supports and resources internally to support our programs on the ground.
So now as the budget season begins, what does the work look like for you, Kelly, or your organization moving forward until, a state budget is passed and signed later this year?
We are going to be meeting a lot. We have a lot of new legislators this session, so we need to do a lot of new education on the importance and value of after school. Again, that it's not just babysitting, that it's so much more. And our children really suffered a lot during the pandemic, and we really need to make sure we are supporting them now through this critical time. And we really should be using our American Rescue Plan dollars. New York State, all of that money that was dedicated for after school and summer that was put to the state decided to give back to the local school districts. So now all of the local school districts have so much money that's not being spent. And we're really encouraging them just to work with their community organizations and figure out how they can best support these programs.
Kelly McMahon is CEO of the New York State Network for Youth Success, which is advocating for stronger after-school programs as lawmakers debate the next state budget. You're listening to The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. Albany Law School in Albany, New York is the country's oldest independent school of law. And on July 1st, 2023, Cinnamon Pinion Carlarn will take over as its 19th president and dean after a national search. A leading international expert in environmental and climate change law policy, Carlarn is coming to New York from Ohio State University's Moritz College of Law, where she is currently Associate Dean for Faculty and Intellectual Life. We spoke as she prepares for her next role.
I've known about Albany Law School since I entered academia, and so when the opportunity arose, I was, of course, very excited. And I will also say it's an incredibly warm and collegial community filled with outstanding field-leading scholars as well.
So I understand that you're an expert on environmental and climate law. And here in New York State, the state just released its sort of roadmap. They call it a scoping plan to help meet its ambitious clean energy goals. So I wanted to ask you about how important it is to educate the next generation of lawyers on climate policy.
Oh, absolutely. So this is one of the many things that I'm very passionate about. But climate change is a challenge that really ripples across society in a variety of ways. It implicates everything from the air we breathe, the water we drink, just to the kind of the health and well-being of the populace as a whole. And so I think that education around climate change and the possibilities of using and really drawing upon the rule of law in the context of climate change to ensure a safer and better future for everyone is incredibly important. And of course, it's really exciting to be moving to a state such as New York, which has been very progressive in the climate change context, and both New York City and New York State are really leaders in thinking about climate change from both a mitigation and adaptation perspective. And so that's an exciting part of joining the New York community. And there's already folks at Albany Law School who are really thinking about these issues and working on these issues. And so it's a terrific opportunity to join an engaged community that's thinking progressively in this space.
So in other words, there are things that happen in New York State with policy, climate as an example, that set examples that other states pick up down the line. So it must be really important then to get it right in New York.
That's right. So what you see in the context of environmental law and climate change is the importance really of leadership and states serving as a laboratory of democracy and the kind of the process of iterative learning. And when you think about leaders in the space, there's states like New York, Massachusetts, and California. And so it's absolutely important that these states are really, thinking deeply and collectively about how to address these challenges. Now, whether or not you get it right from the beginning, of course, with the rule of law, it's always an iterative learning process. But it is really, really important at this stage when we're thinking about climate change law and policy in particular to have a very, engaged process when we're thinking about building the rule of law, and a process that hears the voices of everyone that's involved, because what you see in the climate change context is it affects everyone, but of course it affects particular communities disproportionately. And one of the things that New York is doing and is really thinking hard about doing is how to make sure that the law and policymaking process is very inclusive and iterative in ways that really do set a great example for other states and other communities.
Albany Law's Immigration Law Clinic in upstate New York made headlines during the Trump years when migrants from the southern border were housed at the Albany County Jail. The law clinic provided legal services, and it also received an army of volunteers from across the area for translation help. Now, fast forward a few years later, you have Republican governors in southern states sending migrants to New York and other liberal states. So what do you see as the importance of the Immigration Law Clinic, and would you want to see possibly an expansion or a bolstering of the law clinic?
So I think that the Immigration Law Clinic is exceptional and is one of the things that I was very impressed with when I started to learn more about Albany Law School. And I will say at Ohio State, we just started our Immigration Law Clinic about a year ago, and we've done a lot of learning from other schools that have had an Immigration Law Clinics longer and have been doing this kind of work. And Albany Law School is definitely one of those clinics. And I think our immigration challenges and the challenges around the kind of the federalism questions that are arising, as you say, between some of the northern states and the southern states are not likely to get better in the near future. And so these clinics play incredibly important roles. And, the lives of people, the everyday lives of people. And so I would love to see a continuing commitment to this clinic, and love to make sure that this clinic is able to do the work that they have been doing, that they feel supported and they feel like they have the resources that they need to continue to do the excellent work that they've been doing for many years now, and really that's created a model for other clinics nationwide.
Going back to our earlier discussion on environmental law and climate change and tying in with immigration law, I've thought about climate refugees, and soon there will be a time, there already is a time now, where people are leaving their homes to come to places where it's cooler to escape a changing climate. How do you see this problem, and how do we need to prepare for it?
Climate migration is actually a very serious issue, and it's one that we're already encountering both domestically and internationally. And so what you're starting to see is in the parts of the world that are kind of the earliest and worst hit by climate change, folks are being displaced. And of course, climate change intersects with other kinds of threats to stability, economic, political. And so we're starting to see increased patterns of immigration internationally that can be attributed to climate change. But also domestically, what we're starting to see are increased patterns of domestic movement as a result of climate change. And in particular, some of the communities that are being hardest hit earliest on are indigenous communities and communities of color. And so climate migration is a very serious issue. And so what you're starting to see is that there are different types of communities that are affected by this. The communities where you're seeing climate crises, whether it's fire, sea level rise, and then you're seeing the communities to which these climate migrants are moving. And then, of course, you're also starting to see communities that are trying to make themselves homes to climate migrants. And so they're kind of trying to imagine themselves as climate havens. And so this is a challenge that really, again, folks at Albany Law School have been thinking about these issues and writing about these issues really at the intersection of climate law and immigration law. And so it's incredibly exciting to be joining a community that's thinking about one of the issues that we're going to be thinking about and dealing with in the coming decades.
Currently, it appears to me that private colleges and universities are struggling a bit, especially schools that have a tuition-based model not too far away from here where I'm speaking to you from Albany in Cazenovia, New York. Caz College, a private liberal arts school, will be closing at the end of the spring semester. Are there other similar fiscal challenges that are facing law schools and private institutions like Albany Law?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the challenges that law schools across the country, both public and private, are facing is just thinking about the cost of education and the barriers that creates for making legal education truly accessible to a very diverse and broad range of students. And so this is a challenge that many law schools are thinking about, including Albany Law School. And Albany Law School has actually been doing very, very innovative thinking in this context, thinking about how to ensure that even as the cost of legal education goes up, that it doesn't create barriers to having a truly kind of diverse and inclusive community. And so one of the ways that they're thinking about doing that is, of course, also thinking about fundraising that helps with scholarships, as many schools are, but also thinking about how to diversify the curriculum to create new ways that students can both access legal education through master's courses, through online learning, and then also just doing lots and lots of hard work to make sure that students have the support they need so that they don't have excess debt when they graduate. And so this is definitely a challenge that all of legal education is facing, private schools in particular, as you suggest, but it's also one where there's lots of kind of innovative thinking and learning taking place, and Albany Law School is actually at the forefront of that and thinking about how to diversify the curriculum to make sure that legal education remains accessible, not just for the elite, but for many different kinds of students who want to be part of thinking about the role that the rule of law plays in society.
And along those lines, part of that, I understand, in attracting students is outreach. And so how could you approach students, get people interested in pursuing a career in law? Does that start at the high school level? Does it start, when someone is looking for colleges? Where does that actually start?
Yeah, I think it starts at all of those places. I actually think that it's really, really important to be creative in thinking about how to reach different audiences. And one of the ways to do that is, as you suggest, to create different kinds of pipelines. And so there are more programs, and I know this is something that Albany Law School is thinking about and working on, to create pipelines where even beginning in the high school years, you have summer programs where you bring in students from, all different areas to come in and have a little bit of access to learning about what the law is, how the law operates, why the rule of law is so important, why it's so important that we have diverse voices that are working in this space. And so creating kind of these high school pipeline programs and then doing outreach in colleges is really important as well. And I know, for example, a number of Albany Law School faculty already do that. They go and speak to college classes. They tell them about what law school really is. Because of course, from the outside in, it's hard to really kind of appreciate what happens in the law school context and how important it is to actually have a very diverse and inclusive group of folks that are learning about the law and then going out into the world and making important decisions with respect to the rule of law. So I do think that it's important to do outreach at every level and in lots of different contexts. And this is something that Albany Law School has really been working on and being very creative about, and I'm really excited to join those efforts.
Professor Cinnamon Pinion-Carlarn will take over as Albany Law School's 19th president and dean on July 1st. This has been The Best of Our Knowledge, episode 1691. The Best of Our Knowledge is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio. Thanks to associate producer Jody Cowan. Our executive producer is Dr. Alan Shartok. To hear past episodes, visit our flagship station's website at wamc.org. Until next time, I'm Lucas Willard.